Good evening and welcome back to 31 Horror Nights. It's October 30th and tonight's movie is The Witch. The Witch is a 2015 supernatural horror movie that was on the side of being more well received by critics than a lot of the other movies on this list. It has a pretty good score on Rotten Tomatoes, it won a bunch of awards, I've heard a lot of good things about it. And I watched it and I thought, I guess it worked, but it's definitely not something I'm gonna go back to. I'm going to give The Witch a 6 out of 10. Most of the movie was not that great, but it did end on a high note. The plot of The Witch is that it's the 1600s, and there's this family of Puritans living in New England, and they live out in the woods. And pretty much as soon as they move out into the woods, weird stuff starts happening around them. Things get really tense, they get at each other's throats. One of the first scares of the entire movie, which is why I'm not counting it as a spoiler at all, is that one of the daughters is playing peekaboo with the baby, and just one time she covers her face, and then when she uncovers it, the baby is just gone, completely silently without a trace. And there are other weird things happening. There's this rabbit that appears from time to time, and the horse and the dog completely freak out every time they see it. They also have two little twins that insist that the goat can talk to them and tells them secrets, telling them that their older sister is really a witch. Overall, it's a pretty solid plot for a horror movie, and from an execution standpoint, this is done very well, but I think that the biggest problem with The Witch is that it is just not an enjoyable movie. Pretty much the entire thing is just dreary as hell. Now, I know that this is intentional. Not only is this a time and a place where pretty much everybody was just always miserable, this family had an extra reason to be sad because the dad did something that the church of their town didn't like, and they got banished to live in the woods for the rest of their lives. So yeah, I understand why they made the tone what it is, but I feel like they went a little bit too far. Even the cinematography is totally dreary and depressing in this movie. Colors are completely washed out in gray. The comparatively fat aspect ratio makes every single shot look cramped and uncomfortable, and I think there was maybe 3 times total where I ever saw a character smile. And this movie really doesn't like to take breaks. Any moments of levity in it are few, short, and far in between. Now, I understand what they were going for. If you want to make a depressing movie, make a depressing movie. But I feel like that the entire thing was just too depressing. I think it would have been better if we saw the family happy first, because they talked about being happy in their previous home, in their previous, country. They even start longing for living in England. But I feel like we could have seen that. And then, once things start getting really sad and scary, not only is it more of a contrast, but it's easier to care about the characters when it actually happens. I think when you get right down to it, the story and characters are fine, but the tone I think needed some work. But there are other things to talk about. The acting in this movie, for the most part, was pretty good. They got some pretty good child actors for this as well. In fact, I would say that all of the child actors are noticeably better than the adult actors, the mom and dad, who both can come off a little bit wooden sometimes. But to the actors' credit, I feel like it was hard enough to say the dialogue as it was. In this entire movie, they talk in this, speak that, I guess I could sort of imagine people in, the 1600s using, but it sounds more like something you would hear in medieval times. I don't think I actually heard the word you said once in this entire movie. They always just say thee. Does thee do this? Does thee do that? It's all oldie English speaking. The actual story itself is told and paced pretty well with a few exceptions. There was one example of a plot point that they wanted us to see and notice, but it was so dark and so closely shot that it was hard to tell what was even happening, and I totally missed it. I had to read it on Wikipedia. There also are quite a few red herrings in this story about who's really the witch. Some of them work and make sense after the reveal that it's just a red herring, but some of them don't. To sum up, while this movie absolutely had a bunch of effort put into it, and it does show, I wasn't really crazy about this one. It wasn't bad, but it's just not something I'm ever going to really want to watch again, or recommend to somebody else. Alright, let's talk about some spoilers. Now, around halfway through the movie comes the biggest plot point since the baby died. The two oldest, a young girl and boy, they go out into the woods for something, I don't know, they were looking for meat or whatever, they just had to get out in the woods, and while they're out there, they get separated, and the little boy comes across, the witch's hut in the middle of the woods, and he disappears, and, He like comes back in the middle of the night totally naked in the rain, and when they bring him inside, he acts like he's possessed by a demon. And again, I do have to give credit to the kid actor. He did pretty well. The two twins blame the oldest sister for it, calling her the witch, saying that Black Phillip, the goat, told them about it. And of course, the oldest sister thinks that they're either kids being stupid or they're the witches, considering that they can talk to goats. By the way, there were a couple of kind of laughable moments in this movie when it comes to it trying to scare us with animals. There's a rabbit and a goat, especially, that they try to make us scared of, but both of them just look so derpy. It's kind of funny. Anyway, the son dies, and the parents just freak out, and they lock the remaining daughter and the twins in a barn with, I believe, the black goat, definitely the white goats. And they just try to, like, have a moment's peace and try to figure stuff out. And in the middle of the night, the mother hallucinates and thinks that she's seeing her dead baby and dead son in front of her. And she, like, tries to breastfeed the baby, but later on it cuts to her and it's just a crow pecking at her boob. The dad goes out the next morning to find both of the twins missing. We never know for sure what happens to them, but I'm pretty sure they died. Then Philip the Black Goat gores him with his horns, and he dies. And the mother goes out, sees everything, and tries to kill the daughter, thinking that she's a witch or a demon. And the daughter fights back and kills the mother. So then it's just her left. Then we get what I will admit is a wonderfully executed scene. It's like well after the fact, she like had time to like sit down and get her bearings, and she goes to the barn and she starts asking the goat Black Phillip to help her. And it seems like it's not going to answer, but when she turns around, it replies to her. And I have to say, huge thumbs up to the person, whoever they got to voice the devil goat. He, like, was a really, really good voice for it. And, like, the goat, like, turns into, like, a humanoid shape. You never actually get a good look at it. The barn is too dark, which is a really good touch. But, like, it walks around and it, like, promises her, like, riches and power beyond her wildest dreams if she just follows him. And she agrees, and, like, she goes out into the woods naked, and then she comes across a coven that's dancing around a fire. And it ends with all of them, like, rising up, and you see her, like, the Puritan girl, like, becoming a witch fully, and, like, laughing as she rises up. And then the movie ends. The ending, I will say, is a very good and very well executed ending. And I think is a pretty big part of why I think that this movie did ultimately work in the very end, despite all of its flaws. It's not enough to make the whole movie much better than a 6 out of 10, but it does make me think that this director, this is his directorial debut, will go on to make a lot better stuff in the future. While there were some good things in it, The Witch on a whole just didn't really work that well for me. Technically, I would call it a good movie, but it just wasn't a movie that I had fun watching. Okay, tomorrow is Halloween night. I'll see you then.